Good morning. My name is Mary Blanton, and I'd like to welcome you today on this Sunday, November 29th, 2020, to our North Chapel Sunday service. Usually the Sunday after Thanksgiving, our church pews would be filled with church members and friends and family from far and near who've come to Vermont to help celebrate our Thanksgiving holiday. However, this is not a usual year. I'm sure many of you gathered together on Zoom with friends and family to celebrate, but how do you transmit the wonderful Thanksgiving smells and tastes online? I usually cook a 20-pound turkey, ensuring they'll have plenty of leftovers for the next week. However, with no family coming this time, I chose to celebrate with several friends in a socially distanced way outside, cooking sausages over a open fire in my sugar bush. Despite the pandemic and the lockdown requirements in Vermont, I'm sure many of you, like me, found many things to be grateful for and expressed these gratitudes to friends and family. One of my gratitudes is for our North Chapel community and how we have managed to stay in touch and support one another through this challenging time. Today, Gwen Groff is giving our reflection titled Fall in Love. Gwen has been the minister at the Bethany Mennonite Church in Bridgewater for the past 21 years. Many of you know Gwen as she provided pastoral care for our community after Daniel left before Leon arrived. She has also given a number of wonderful reflections at our church. However, I bet you didn't know that Gwen's first encounter with UU philosophy was in high school when she studied the Transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson for a research paper. Her best friend did her research paper on Emerson's friend, Henry David Thoreau. Gwen and her friend became a bit obsessed with Walden and self-reliance. After 2 years of college, Gwen dropped out and with that friend built a simple log cabin. They made pottery and sewed quilt patch cushions to pay for the land and the material for the simple cabin, which still stands in Southwest Virginia today. Gwen and I emailed back and forth several times about her reflection, as I wanted to finish my welcome by reading a poem. Here is one by Rumi. Be with those who help your being. Be with those who help your being. Don't sit with indifferent people whose breath comes out cold out of their mouths. Not these visible forms. Your work is deeper. A chunk of dirt thrown in the air breaks to pieces. If you don't try to fly and so break yourself apart, you will be broken open by death when it's too late for all you could become. Leaves get yellow. Trees put out fresh roots and make them green. Why are you so content with a love that turns you yellow? Please join me in the singing of our hymn, Come Ye Thankful People, Come.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and I'm speaking to you today from a hilltop in Pomfret, Vermont. And I wanted to read you this poem, which is a recent poem, and it's really about taking stock of wherever you are, noticing what's going on around you. So it's called Report from the Picnic Table on the Top of the World. First, I'll note mountain rose hazed by purple glow, a dim half moon in a blue globe of sky, fields of orange buttercups waving in wind, a host of goldenrod, undulating green weeds, a chorus of soprano crickets, unseen but heard, one solo chickadee singing her aria, dee dee, dee dee, poplar trees clapping their hands in the breeze, and in the shadows of this table in the field, our two dogs chewing on each other's ears. Come here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joby Thompson, and I'm here with Ann McSood.
Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be with you this morning and imagine you out there listening and watching, as we do every Sunday. It's the Stewardship Pledge Drive time now, and Joby and I are going to be talking about social justice at North Chapel. Most of you already know that North Chapel has been an incubator for social and environmental justice actions over many, many years. But today we're just going to mention a few of the things that you might not know about that have been happening.
The number of dollars sent to the Woodstock food shelf for Thanksgiving dinners.
That was this year.
Oh. Okay. The number of people who attended the John Lewis and James Baldwin documentaries on the North Chapel's back lawn. The number of Black Lives Matter vigils attended by North Chapel members every Monday evening until the governor's new rules shut us down. The number of Get Out the Vote postcards sent to battleground states by North Chapel members.
And this big number, a lot of credit goes to Bob Williamson, who inspired us to write these postcards, and he kept track of us too. Thank you, Bob.
The number of trees that have been planted at the new East End Park.
And I did some calculations about the trees and found out that one tree averages about 48 pounds of carbon sequestration every year. So 86 trees absorb more than 2 tons of carbon a year. So imagine the life of all of these trees, and you'll get some idea of the great service that these trees and this park will be doing for our community and for Mother Earth.
And finally, the percent we're hoping you will all raise your pledge by this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
A wise minister told me that we fall in love with people who reveal to us what we most want to become, the next thing we need to develop, the part of ourselves that we didn't know we had within us until we saw it projected outward onto some unsuspecting other that we find ourselves in love with. We may not need to be with them at all. We may just need to fall in love with them for a season in order to learn to be more like them and become more fully ourselves. So I will say, just by way of example, that I fell in love at the beginning of the pandemic with an Irish poet named Padraig O'Tuama. I suspect I'm not alone in this. I met him online. And when I say I met him, I should admit that he didn't meet me. This is unrequited love. The timing was perfect in that the program On Being had just released their new podcast, Poetry Unbound, at the end of February, just before lockdown. Padraig O'Tuama hosts that new program. Each Monday and Friday, Padraig reads a poem, and then he talks about it. He notices a few details about the poem. He makes some connections between the story of the poem and his own personal story. He may say a bit about the poet who wrote the poem and maybe something about the form of the poem, but it's not really about analyzing poetry as literature. He uses the poem to make you come alive to your own life and to the world and to the music in spoken word. And then he closes by reading the poem again. And you hear it differently than you did the first time. And his voice and his accent are so beautiful. As one listener commented, it would be a fine thing just to listen to him read the phone book aloud. So I know I am not alone in falling in love with him. At the beginning of the pandemic, I needed regular rituals to keep me sane and grounded. Still do. I looked forward to Poetry Unbound every Monday and Friday, but then its first season ended. And so then I read Padraig's memoir. You see, we're on a first-name basis now. And then I read Padraig's collections of his own poems. I watched his TED Talk. I found his story on the Moth Radio Hour. I read and listened to everything I could find. Besides being an amazing poet and storyteller, he's also a wise theologian and a trained conflict mediator in Belfast. He was the director of Corrymeela, Ireland's oldest peace and reconciliation community. He speaks eloquently on LGBTQ justice issues. He is a 45-year-old gay Catholic who was subjected to 3 exorcisms and years of so-called reparative therapy to try to change his sexual orientation. He grew up during the Troubles in Ireland in more ways than one. And he shares from his deeply examined life. One day I learned that Padraig O'Tuama was coming to Eastern Mennonite College. I had spent my first 2 years of college at that small liberal arts school in Virginia. And even though it's not where I eventually graduated from, I still get some alumni communications from them, and I was delighted to learn that Padraig Ó Tuama, without leaving Ireland, was doing a week of lectures and poetry readings and chapel reflections for Eastern Mennonite. That was wonderful news and so necessary, because Padraig Ó Tuama carries in his areas of expertise and in his very body a whole bunch of things that Mennonites need to learn. We Mennonites need to get a lot better at dealing directly with conflict, not just pacifist, passive-aggressive conflict avoidance, but brave conflict transformation. Padraig knows about real peacemaking. And we Mennonites need to get so much better with LGBTQ inclusion. Our denomination is broken and still breaking and continuing to harm people. And we need to be humanized with a new story. Padraig knows a lot of healing stories. And we Mennonites need to get better at poetry, language that we create and that creates us and nurtures us and energizes us. We Mennonites need to embrace not only the sacred text of the Bible, but also to discover poetry as sacred scripture. And Padraig knows about poetry. One of the gifts of this horrible pandemic is that so many things that would have been accessible to only a few people in person have been made available to a lot more people online. And so I registered for a week and I scheduled my life around Padraig Ó Tuama's Zooms from Ireland. When I confessed to a friend that I think I'm a little bit in love with a gay Catholic poet from Corrymeela, whom I've never met, she wisely said, "What is it about him that you love most?" That is the right question. What is it about him that you love cuts through any illusion that it's about him and gets to what it is that I've projected onto him. What is it that I need to learn that I can only see when it is outside myself? What is it that is already seated in me that I had kept hidden from myself and that I am now ready to discover and to become? I think I said first that I love the way he is so fully embodied. Not that I love his body, but that I love that he is so freely at home in it. Every movement seems authentic, every gesture and facial expression, every sudden laugh and silent pause, his posture, his pronunciation, his word choices, even his eye contact on Zoom. It seems like he is completely at ease in his own skin. That's what I see and think, I want to be more like that. I want my inside and outside to be so completely congruent. Here's one of his poems that I think speaks to that. It's called How to Be Alone by Padraig Ó Tuama. It all begins with knowing nothing lasts forever. So you might as well start packing now. But in the meantime, practice being alive. There will be a party where you will feel like nobody's paying you attention. And there will be a party where attention's all you'll get. What you need to do is know how to talk to yourself between these parties. And, again, there will be a day, a decade, where you won't fit in with your body, even though you're in the only body you're in. You need to control your habit of forgetting to breathe. Remember when you were younger and you practiced kissing your arm? You were onto something then. Sometimes harm knows its own healing, comfort its own intelligence, kindness too. It needs no reason. There is a you telling you a story of you. Listen to her. Where do you feel anxiety in your body? The chest? The fist? The dream before waking? the head that feels like it's at the top of the swing, or the clutch of gut like falling and falling and falling and falling, it knows something. You're dying. Try to stay alive. For now, touch yourself. I'm serious. Touch yourself. Take your hand and place your hand someplace upon your body and listen to the community of madness that you are. You are such an interesting conversation. You belong here. A lovely thing about that poem is that the title is printed as How to Belong, and then belong is crossed out and corrected to How to Be Alone. Also, I said to my friend, I love that he is so generous. He shares his life. He freely offers many words. He grew up speaking both Irish and English, and so he says he has the Irish notion of why use 5 words if you can say it in 50. He tells stories. His stories are sometimes hilarious and sometimes achingly raw. His Moth radio hour story is as good as it gets. His generosity with his own story comes out most in his unscripted interviews, the question and answer times, his responses to the chat box. He's not without boundaries of privacy and time limits, but it's as if he wants to make as many real connections as possible. If it's an online forum, whenever he receives a question from the moderator, he asks the name of the person who posted the question and thanks them for the question. If he reads the comments from the chat box, he says the name of the person who offered the comment. He knows the power of a name pronounced correctly. In one interactive poetry lecture, he asked, when do you feel most alive? Something simple, mundane that you experience in your body. Drop the answer into the chat box. And I thought, what the heck? And I typed my answer into the chat. And then he started reading them. And I heard him read my answer. He said, waking up and remembering a dream. How magnificent. Jung is a great friend for that, Gwen. Although maybe you have other friends that accompany you in the imagination of what a dream can be. And then he moved on to the next answer in the chat box. After I recovered my breath, I thought, I want to be more like that. I want to become more generous with my listening, more free in conversation. I want to be not just silent, asking questions and holding space, but also responding with kindness and spontaneity and enthusiasm to every question. Here's another poem by Padre Gotuma called Narrative Theology Number 1. And I said to him, are there answers to all of this? And he said, the answer is in the story, and the story is being told. And I said, but there is so much pain. And she answered plainly, pain will happen. Then I said, will I ever find meaning? And they said, you will find meaning where you give meaning. The answer is in the story, and the story isn't finished. Padre Gotuma is also incredibly generous with his expressions of gratitude. It seems he too is someone who falls in love with people in the hope of becoming more like them. I heard an interview just this week in which the host asked him about Rumi. And so Padraig told a story about Rumi. Padraig said that many people today try to strip Rumi of his Muslim identity, which is a great injustice to Muslims as a people, as well as to Rumi and his work. Translators today try to make him more universal by erasing his differences. But in the 13th century, different faiths were easily in conversation. Rumi was asked by a Christian church in Iran if he would give them an inscription for putting over the door of their church. And Rumi offered these words for the church entrance: "Where Jesus is, the great-hearted gather. We are a door that's never locked." Padraig said, how can we be more like that? When someone asks us for a kindness, how can we find a way to say something that elevates the kindness of the other without trying to dominate or subjugate or colonize? How can we ask someone who isn't part of our practice, somebody who admires but is not an adherent of it, to offer us something that could help us be more of ourselves? We need that kind of poetry. Poetry that can help us see the parts of ourselves that we can't see. There's such reciprocality in Rumi's work, and I find that to be so moving. That's what Padraig said. And I want to say to you, North Chapel congregation, that Padraig's observation about Rumi is what I find to be true of you. I don't know all of you, but those of you that I do know do not practice the kind of universalism that tries to erase differences. You practice that reciprocality that says, let's invite our differences to speak to one another. Let's invite those whose traditions we admire but don't adhere to into conversation with us to help us become more ourselves. This is what you do with each other, among yourselves, and it's your outward-facing stance in the community. You say, knowing that we don't believe the same things, please help us see the parts of ourselves we can't see and become the parts of ourselves that we haven't yet grown into. You respect the differences. You project kindness. You fall in love in order to learn, in order to grow. I'd like to close with one more of Padraig Ó Tuama's poems called The Facts of Life. The facts of life: that you were born and you will die. That you will sometimes love enough and sometimes not. That you will lie, if only to yourself. That you will get tired. That you will learn most from the situations you did not choose. That there will be some things that move you more than you can say. That you will live. That you must be loved. That you will avoid questions most urgently in need of your attention. That you began as the fusion of a sperm and an egg of two people who once were strangers and may well still be. That life isn't fair. That life is sometimes good and sometimes even better than good. That life is often not so good. That life is real. And if you can survive it, well, survive it well, with love and art and meaning given where meaning's scarce. That you will learn to live with regret. That you will learn to live with respect. That the structures that constrict you may not be permanently constricting. That you will probably be okay. That you must accept change before you die, but you will die anyway. So you might as well live, and you might as well love. You might as well love. You might as well love.